Good afternoon, everybody. Massachusetts Attorney General Martha Coakley. I'm honored to have with me today Congressman Stephen Lynch, our Senate Minority Leader Bruce Tarr, Representative Ann Margaret Ferrante, and our Secretary Rick Sullivan, representing fishing families in the fishing industry, and you'll hear from them, Joe Orlando and Vito Giacalone. And I'd also like to recognize and thank Governor Patrick for his support on this issue. Our senators, Senator Elizabeth Warren and Mo Cowan, our entire congressional delegation, and Mayors Mitchell from New Bedford and Kirk from Gloucester for their leadership on this issue. Today we filed a lawsuit alleging that the federal government has utterly failed its responsibility in considering the devastating economic impact of their regulations on our fishing families and communities in Massachusetts. NOAA's new regulations are essentially a death penalty on the fishing industry in Massachusetts as we know it. We believe, and we allege in this suit, that this dire economic impact must be considered before the new rules are put into place, and that NOAA must take steps to mitigate that harm. We allege that they totally ignored this impact. They've also plowed forward with these draconian changes, even though they are built, we believe, on an imperfect science. If our federal government is going to threaten the very existence of our fishing industry, then it seems like it's not too much to ask that the underlying science used be credible and reliable. Even if NOAA's fish counts of 2012 will be reversed in 2013 or 2014, that may prove far too late for the small businesses already operating on the margin as we speak today. And this from an agency that we know already has a history of relentless and overzealous regulation. NOAA's failure to do its job right is costing the jobs of our fishing families across Massachusetts. Today we do the one thing we believe may make a difference. We take our fight to the court, and we're going to ask a judge to reverse these new rules. When the catch share system, or quota system, was developed less than a decade ago, fishermen adjusted. It wasn't easy, but they got together and they tried to make it work, and they did what the government asked them to do. They made it work until the regulations were enforced unfairly and punitively. NOAA seized fishermen's property with no accountability. They failed to track those forfeitures and that forfeiture money, and NOAA's former director was forced out. Now they've completely changed the game again. A 77% cut to the catch share system may prove to be just too much. We've called on the Commerce Secretary and the President to put this unfair system on hold. Let there be no doubt they have the power to act, and they should act to protect our fishing families. But we've gotten silence and no action. So instead of waiting for a response while an industry is irreversibly harmed, we are challenging the catch share system and these latest rules in court. Our family fishing industry is in part of Massachusetts' proud history, and we hope and believe that it also must be part of our vibrant economic future. We don't suggest that we fail to protect our fishing stocks for future generations. Nobody wants that, and we will do that. But we need good science and fair decisions from our government and make sure that we preserve fish stocks while we keep the industry alive. We're here today to stand with fishing families and fishing communities across the Commonwealth. We will continue to fight for those families until the industry is thriving again. Thank you. It's my pleasure to introduce next Congressman Stephen Lynch.
Thank you. Thank you, Attorney General Coakley. I am here on behalf of the Massachusetts delegation. What we were hoping for in response to the need to build fishing stock and also to continue a viable fishing industry in Massachusetts was a balanced approach. That's not what we have here. We have an approach by NOAA and the Fishery Management Council that we think will result in the destruction of the fishing industry in Massachusetts. A 77% cut in the catch share will devastate, will destroy the fishing industry in Massachusetts. That's not what we're looking for. We understand there's a need to manage fish stock and to manage our way back to a healthier fishing environment. However, this response that we see, these regulations that we see, would simply put the fishing industry out of business. That's the approach that's on the table right now. And I want to congratulate Attorney General Martha Coakley and Representative Ferrante and also Bruce Tarr and the other elected officials that have come together. I want to thank especially Attorney General Coakley for filing this lawsuit, but it is filed out of frustration. Make no mistake about that we have not had the dialogue, we've not had the give and take, we've not had the approach of trying to find a balanced solution. This has been a one-sided, arrogant, and almost a self-righteous approach here that the way to restore fishing stock is to put every single fishing family in Massachusetts out of business. That's the approach that's being used here. And it's one that we have to push back on. It's one that we have to demand justice and fairness in. This will be a long fight, but I think we're on the side of the angels here. And I think there's a way forward that allows us to, as I say, allow the fishing stock to recover, but also allows a viable fishing industry to continue in Massachusetts. So again, and I think someone who could probably speak to this issue in day-to-day terms as a fisherman himself is Joe Orlando from the Gloucester Fishermen.
Thank you, Congress.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Joe Orlando, and I am from the fishing community of Gloucester. My father and I, and my ancestors before me, I am a lifelong fisherman. I own and operate my own fishing vessel. The name of it is fishing vessel Padre Pio. The Padre Pio is a 65-foot trawl vessel, which I operate with my son Mario. We fish out of Gloucester for groundfish, for haddock, cod, and flounders. We fish during the day and return to port at night. We make an honest living while providing fresh fish to the American people. My story is just like other small businesses that have managed to survive reductions after reductions in fishery management changes. Fishermen like my son and I worked hard and sacrificed to rebuild these fish stocks. We did so with the promise that the future of the groundfish fishery will be very bright, with key stocks to be rebuilt by 2014. Because of that promise, I heavily invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in the fisheries to make my business viable. Just 3 years ago, I had the ability to catch 100,000 pounds of Gulf of Maine cod. Because of these drastic cuts, I'm only allowed to catch now 16,000. My son and I work hard to provide for our families and put food on the American table. Yet today, we stand here and to tell you that 16,000 pounds of Gulf of Maine cod just doesn't cut it. On other species, I took an average cut of 50%. My livelihood has been slashed before my eyes because the scientific report changes so drastically. With these reductions, I can't even afford to properly maintain my boat. Expenses keep adding up. My boat is due for upgrades and an engine overhaul that's going to cost $50,000, and I just can't afford to do it. Other fishermen are in my same shoes. The reductions will cause safety issues too. Mario and I have to be careful today when we go fishing or we plan our days. We fished one trip this month, and I think we only have a couple more trips until July, and then we're done completely. We won't be allowed to bring in enough to even pay out business's debts. I am in financial ruin. My son, who has 3 young kids, a wife, and a new house, wanted to take our business into the next generation. Now it's just not possible without some sort of help. There has to be a balance between sustaining fish population and sustaining fishing communities. It's sad to think that our strong fishing industry will possibly come to an end. Once the small businesses that New England is known for are gone, they will not come back, as we've seen it in the past. We have to do something to preserve both the fish and our fishermen. The interim rule request for the Gulf of Maine cod and Gulf of Maine haddock was a step in the right direction. Thank you to Attorney General Coakley for your ongoing support for the fishing community. Thank you for stepping up and recognizing that conservation can be achieved without destroying my business or the entire fishery. I appreciate your help to do what's right. Thanks again. And at this time, I would like to introduce Vito Gigoloni from the Northeast Seafood Coalition. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. As Executive Director of the Gloucester Fishing Community Preservation Fund, I see firsthand the financial and personal devastation of these reductions on fishing families and dependent shoreside businesses. My own family's financial future is now threatened. I have 3 adult sons who own and operate a fish offloading business in Gloucester that they started in 2008 with a dream of participating in an industry that federal statistics promised would be enjoying huge increased yields. These huge yields were to be the result of the years the fishery has been operating well within the strict limits set forth by what was said to be precautionary management. These huge yields, many fishermen and shoreside businesses trusted those projections and did their part to prepare to deliver the much needed protein to U.S. seafood consumers. Now, literally millions of dollars and families' lives are at great risk. The Boston Fish Pier houses many long-standing businesses who have endured decades of strict regulations. Now to be told that local supply of fish will be abruptly halted. By not implementing interim measures and other mitigating measures proposed that were rejected, we are accepting known and permanent damages in return for speculated long-term stock growth. Had the agency implemented interim measures, facilitated promised access to mortality closures, and other proposed mitigating measures, fishing families and shoreside infrastructure would have a far greater chance of adjusting while the stocks still increase. That's right. The interim catch levels in 2013 would still result in Gulf of Maine cod increasing in size by 14%. This is the type of balance contemplated in the law that has not been adequately utilized in our opinion. I want to thank also Attorney General Martha Coakley for sending this message today that fishing is still very important in the state and to the Commonwealth. We're grateful to the Governor, Secretary Sullivan, state legislators, and the many federal members of Congress for their continued support for our historic industry. This time I'd like to introduce our state Senator Bruce Tarr.
Thank you very much, Vito, and good afternoon. And Vito, thanks to you and thanks to Joe for working to carry on this tradition of one of Massachusetts' oldest industries against the threat of crushing regulations that are going to steal your livelihood if nothing changes. We owe you a great debt of gratitude, and you are why we stand here. We stand here to say first thank you to the Attorney General, because you made a commitment when we last stood here, and you said that you would do whatever you could to stand up for this industry, and today you are doing it. And I am honored to stand here with my colleagues in government, with Secretary Sullivan, with Congressman Lynch, with Representative Ferranti, and we stand here as representatives of many of our colleagues who aren't with us today, but stand with us united in the fight in this 11th hour to save our commercial fishing industry. And we stand here in support of the Attorney General's efforts by filing this petition to bring fairness and justice and common sense and practicality to a situation right now that knows none of those. We predicted when we last stood here that if the measures went into effect on May 1st that were planned, they would have devastating effects. And they are having devastating effects on fishing families, on fishing ports, on our waterfront infrastructure that we depend on to harvest the fish that feed this nation. There is a tremendous amount of risk at risk. And we stood here and pleaded with the federal government, with federal regulators, not our federal legislative delegation. They have stood with us, as Congressman Lynch does here today. But we said to federal regulators, please take a minute and give us an interim rule that will help to rebuild stocks and at the same time allow our harvest capacity to survive. And they said no, just as they have said no so many times to the practical ideas put on the table by the men and women that depend on this industry for their livelihood, and on behalf of consumers that depend on them to be able to consume a fresh fish product, which these regulations are denying them. And so we stand here today having exhausted almost all of those options. A disaster has been declared here, and yet commerce is not responding to assist with that disaster. You know what? It's not a natural disaster, it's a regulatory disaster, being caused by rules that are based on unsound science, and which, as this complaint, this petition argues very, very compellingly, violates the provisions of the Magnuson Act itself. Because when Congress wrote these rules to protect our domestic fishery, they wrote them so that we would balance conservation and supporting fishing families and fishing ports. And this petition, it tells a story of a rogue federal agency that's violating the provisions of the Magnuson Act, that's depriving us of common sense solutions that will help fishing families and ports to survive, and that if left with no check against its authority, will leave us with no commercial fishing industry as we know it today. So we must stand here. We must stand shoulder to shoulder with the Attorney General, and we will, in appreciation for her efforts, but understanding that at long last, we have someone from the federal government in a position to change the course of these regulations in the form of a judge in the district court who is sworn to be impartial. And we'll take our chances that when you look at the facts and the law, that impartial judge will act to save the commercial fishing industry. We hope for it, we pray for it, and we'll do everything we can to make sure that happens. I'm pleased to introduce next one of our colleagues in state government, who among other things is responsible for the agency that has argued time and again at the New England Fisheries Management Council for reasonable measures, as our state has fought to protect people like Joe and Vito and their families. So I'm pleased to hand the microphone off and to introduce to you our Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs, Rick Sullivan. Rick?
Thank you, Senator, and thank you for those kind words of introductions. And Attorney General, thank you for allowing me to be here today to add my voice and the voice of Governor Patrick and Lieutenant Governor Murray in support of the actions that you are taking moving forward with this lawsuit. But make no doubt about it, we are here today because of what you heard from Joe and for Vito. That is what is real. That is what is happening on the ground. That is what is happening to the families that have been in the fishing industry here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts for generations. Governor Patrick has long been an advocate of the fishing industry and the families that make up the fishing industry in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Certainly from a historic perspective, for what it currently means to the economy of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and more importantly, what it means for the generations of fishermen and their families that will come. The governor has supported discussions and the votes, as the senator referenced, at the fisheries councils. We have done the lobbying, we have made the phone calls, we have filed different pieces of legislations. The petitions have been filed, they have been sent, they have been received but they have not been acted upon. And as I have said time and time again, sometimes there are certain things that are just worth fighting for, and there are actions that just have to be taken. And the action that we are here today to support is that of the lawsuit being filed by the Attorney General. And we do not do that lightly, but it is time, in order to be able to have this further discussion and to get the results that we are looking for, we need to file this lawsuit. Because the governor has supported reasonable science, cooperative science. The lawsuit asks for that. We have asked for a reasonable interim measure in terms of catch share. The lawsuit asks for that. We have asked for relief to the fishermen for the disaster that has been declared, and the lawsuit does that. Sometimes it is just necessary. It is not an action that is taken lightly, but it is one that the governor, the lieutenant governor, and the entire Secretariat of Energy and Environmental Affairs supports, because it is just time, and it is just necessary, and it is just the right thing to do. At this time, it's my great privilege to introduce someone who is on the ground fighting these fights every single day. And I think I can honestly say I have never seen the representative inside or outside the halls underneath the Golden Dome, where the issues of fisheries, the families that make up the fisheries, in Gloucester in particular, are not the first and only thing that we talk about. Representative Ann Margaret Ferranti.
Thank you, and I want to thank all of you for being here today. I speak to you not only as a state representative, but as a proud daughter of a fisherman, and as a proud granddaughter of two fishermen. And today, when you look at Joe and you look at Vito, I don't want you to see just two fishermen that are facing hard times. I want you to see the lifeblood of my community, the heritage of my community. And when you see that vessel over there, I just don't want you to see a boat that might be put out of business. I want you to see a boat that was used to put kids through college, a boat that was used to feed families, and a boat that was used to feed not only families dependent upon the fishing industry and in the fishing industry, but families throughout this country who bought the fish that they caught, put it on their family's table, and enjoyed the meal that these two men have sacrificed their life to fish. Now I want to thank Attorney General, I want to thank the Secretary, I want to thank the Congressman, because this has been a team effort. And I hope everybody's paying attention right now, because I'm going to say something that most people won't publicly, okay? It's time that we talk about the dirty little secret. And the dirty little secret is this isn't about fish. This is about a vindictive agency. Now, why do I say that, and why do I make that bold statement? And do I make that statement easily? No, I don't. But a few months ago, it was this delegation, it was this Attorney General that came to Gloucester and said, "Oh my Lord, here are some of the worst abuses of government. Here are some of the worst civil rights violations that are occurring, and this agency needs to be held accountable." And they fought with us. They took all of the violations that we were complaining about, they took them to Washington, they went to the Obama administration, and they said these need to be taken seriously. And what happened as a result? As a result, the head of NOAA herself flew into Gloucester, convened a group of fishermen, apologized to them, and paid them for the injury that they had sustained. So now here we are, a couple months later. And for those of us who have been in the trenches, it's no surprise that we're here once again. Because when the regulations were discussed at the New England Fisheries Management Council, the councilors, which include the five states, Maine, New Hampshire, more than five actually, Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New Jersey, and New York, when they came together, it was almost unanimous that we would go with an interim rule that would allow for a 40% cut. We're not talking about status quo, we're talking about a 40% cut. Each of the states who bear the same responsibility as the federal government to protect fish stocks voted for a 40% cut, and that's what they supported. And what did the government say? The government came back and said it's a day of reckoning. And none of us believed that when they said it was a day of reckoning, it would be a day of reckoning because of the crisis within the fish stocks. No, what all of us understood that is there'd be a day of reckoning for holding them responsible on the enforcement actions and forcing the head of their agency to come to Gloucester to apologize and to pay retribution. That's what this is about. And I applaud the Attorney General because she sees through this. She sees through this and she knows she's going to stand up, she's going to protect the citizens of her Commonwealth, and she's going to say when the vindictiveness comes out, when that vindictiveness comes out that says it's not good enough to cut, it's not good enough to cut, it's not good enough to protect the stocks. What we want is we want to drive the people that complained about us into the ground and financially ruin them so they can't survive and obliterate a whole industry that was strong enough to stand up with its congressional delegation, with its AG, and with its governor to say this is wrong. We want to send a message to everybody that's out there and say, go ahead. You want to complain about us? You want to hold us accountable after we tell you that we're accountable to no one? You go ahead and do that, but we're going to come right back at you, and we're going to hit you 5 times harder than we did before. And if it weren't for this group behind me, if it weren't for this team behind me, see those two gentlemen? See those two gentlemen? They would have no hope, they would have no prayer, and they would have no chance against a government that sadly wants to make them pay for holding them accountable. Thank you.
Questions?